Well, we're back here in sunny Australia, and our trusty Toyota HiAce is still going strong, although it does have a massive radiator leak. I think it's a cracked radiator core. It's Boxing Day today, so I've bought a replacement radiator, but there's a problem in that it's slightly different. Well, not unexpectedly, we've made it about an hour up the motorway, but this radiator's got serious problems. I'm not sure whether it's just coming out of here because we've hit the red zone and the leak is elsewhere, because there's a lot of coolant back here for some reason. Just taken the radiator cap off with a towel so I don't scald myself. We drove about an hour from the airport to a place called Welby. Had to fill up the radiator once in that time. Actually got stopped by the police on the motorway for driving so slowly. And you can see the cars or the vans covered with coolant everywhere. Obviously, as it hits the fan, it sprays it all over. So it's difficult to see exactly where it's leaking. But I think it's actually the radiator, but we'll soon find that out. The problem with the radiator we've bought is that the outlet pipe is on the other side, and there's an additional outlet pipe up here, which I think is probably for an automatic vehicle. So I actually bought this radiator prior to coming out to Australia, and a friend of mine picked it up. So it's definitely very similar. The bottom pipe is on the right side there, but it has this extra fitting here. So my plan is just to put a piece of hose and cap that. But the biggest problem is that this fitting here on this radiator is going to end up being on this side as opposed to this side, which is a bit of a bummer. What I'm going to try and do, I've just been along to Repco, which thankfully is open on Boxing Day, and bought the longest piece of pipe that I can find. And what I'm going to hopefully do is take off the thermostat housing here and spin it round and cut this long length of pipe. What I can't remember is on this van whether the thermostat housing needs a special sealant or whether, like on a Mercedes, it would just be a cardboard gasket. I guess we will find that out. No idea how it comes out, whether you have to take it out the bottom, whether it will fit out the bottom, or whether you maybe have to take this section out and take the whole front seat out, and whether it comes sideways. There just are two brackets, one here, one on the other side, and one up the top there, and I think the radiator shroud will be bolted here. So let's just take this hose here off first and see how we get on with that. Now this is a 1982 van, and you can see that a lot of this housing here is corroded away. I don't think that's going to be too much of a tragedy, but let's see what happens when we take this off, whether or not it actually will spin around the other way, because that might be our first stumbling block. This bolt in here is very tight. I've gone backwards and forwards several times. It almost looks like, okay, there is a gasket in there. It almost looks like these have been helicoiled. So that's good. We can hopefully reuse that gasket. The question is, this here would be the thermostat. Don't really need to take that out. Don't know why I did that. It does look like a sealant has been used on here before. I'm not sure if you're supposed to use a sealant, but what we'll try and do is get rid of all of that very carefully without scratching the mating surfaces. So there's several bolts holding the radiator on. One here, we've undone. One here. And then there's all of these pipes here that held on with the bracket. So we're going to take this bracket here off. And then there's only one bracket at the top holding this on. We've driven this up on axle stands to hopefully give us enough room to drop this radiator down. We'll soon find out. The shroud here is held on with 3 bolts, one on that side, 2 on this side, and then the last thing holding this on is this top nut here. Did you get covered with enough coolant then?
Yeah, I think so.
So we're not 100% certain whether this is actually, this is all leaking out on the road there, but whether this is actually the source of the problem. But I guess we'll soon find out, won't we, when I mean, it's pretty knackered, this radiator. It won't do any harm putting a new one on. It'd be fun getting those bolts back in. I have to remember to take this here off. I have to take these ones off. So the way these come out, you have to press the metal insert out, and then this should just fit through the hole. It's quite a tight fit, but you've got to be careful that you don't break those when you get them out. And also remember which way round they go. Another difference we've spotted with this radiator is that the fan shroud at the end here is profiled to fit the radiator. This radiator goes in, whereas the new radiator goes straight down. So we're going to have to cut a bit out of this shroud. We're just going to have to grind this bit off here with an angle grinder because it's not sitting flush, otherwise it sticks out by that amount. This radiator in, it's not a perfect fit. We had to cut some of the shroud off here, bend that bracket down a little bit there to make it fit. This here is capped off just with a bit of rubber pipe, 2 clamps and a bolt in the end. We've just been along to Super Cheap Auto and bought a little set of these brushes, and we're just going to clean off any old gasket sealant just using a brass brush so we don't scratch anything, and then we should be ready to put some new RTV on there. We're just going to be using some of this JB Weld Red High Temp RTV. It's important that you get the high temperature stuff because obviously that will be hot. We've got a very thin bead of gasket sealer under that metal gasket and another one on top. It's really important to do these up finger tight first in a crisscross pattern and then go around with a wrench and just tighten them down. I don't know what the torque specs are, but what you do not want to do is be stripping the threads out because that would be a disaster. Just in case there's anybody who ever needs to do the same thing, 22529 is the part number of that hose from Repco. We've made up the gasket and we've waited an hour, and now we're going to turn these bolts another half turn. I'm going to have another go at topping the radiator. Now, when I did this yesterday, I had coolant leaking out from this thermostat housing. Now, I've had to turn this thermostat housing around 120 degrees, and possibly over the years this kind of top has melded to the bottom, so I've redone the seal, left it 24 hours, and we're going to give it another go. So far so good, although I've realized when I try and bleed the air out the system, this is probably way too high. It's going to come bubbling out, but so far we haven't got any leaks here. So the next thing is I'm going to try turning the engine on with all the heaters on and see if we can get some air out the system and see, once we've built a bit of pressure, whether this holds good. Well, the good news is we've got the van up to temperature and there are no leaks coming from there. The bad news is we have a leak from here. Now, at first I thought this was just a faulty radiator, but I think I found what the problem is. This radiator came with this additional fitting here which we've capped off, but if you have a look at how loose that fitting is, I think what's happening is it's leaking from that fitting, running down the front of the radiator and finding its way down there because the van is on a slight angle. So I'm going to try and tighten that fitting up. Now, I've got a horrible suspicion we're tightening into plastic, and the worst thing in the world is to over tighten and break it, but I don't see what choice I've got. Okay, so far so good. We don't have any leaks. What we've got to do now is take the van off the ramps and actually take it for a drive and see what happens when we start going uphill. The one thing we don't have, which implies to me that there's still air in the system, is when we put the heaters on. We've been running the heaters on with the radiator cap off, trying to get all the air out the system, but we're still not blowing any hot air, so that's a bit of a concern. Well, we made it 4 hours up north towards one of our favourite spots, the Mile Lake River Camp, and no overheating, no leaks, so I think we can safely say that's job done and start our Australian adventure.